The following program is a UWTV classic.
From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection.
I'm Ross Reynolds, and this is Upon Reflection. Welcome. He was a California gang member for 15 years. His brother died in his arms. He turned his life around because of philosophy, and today he's a violence prevention specialist who uses philosophy in his work in Concord, California with the police department. Thanks very much for being with us today, Jim Hernandez.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Your father was a gang member, a member of the Zoot Suiters, which some people might remember as a fashion statement, but was also a California gang of the 40s?
Yes, he was.
What kind of gang was that?
Him and his friends hung out during the middle 40s, just posturing themselves as hoodlums, as some sort of force not to be reckoned with. So it was basically posturing a violent stance.
When you were growing up in that family, did that have an influence on your attitude towards gangs? Did your father encourage you or discourage you from getting involved?
There was an encouragement. There was a nonverbal one in that both him and my mother had tattooed crosses on their hands, the Pachuco cross it was known as. So that was always present in the home. Even though after many years he didn't dress that way and he didn't, had that lifestyle in a sense, the thing that drove him in it, violence, was very pervasive in the home. He was very physically abusive to his kids. He was an alcoholic, still is an alcoholic, I should say. Mm-hmm. And so the anger, the hate, the cruelty that the man had inside of himself reigned through the house.
How old were you when you got involved in gangs, and how did that come about?
I was approximately about 15 years old, and that came about through violence in the home, that I could no longer contain it within myself, of not only his beatings, but now the pickings on and the beatings of my two older brothers. And finally, there needed to bring that out somehow. A human being can only hold so much. And during the late 60s, quite a few of my friends and those who went through this similar lifestyle, or I should say it was a lifestyle in the home, somehow got the impression or the message that if you are violent, if you are mean, if you are cruel, that there's a sense of power in that, meaning that people can't pick on you and you're no longer prey, or you're no longer preyed upon. And if you're preyed upon, that's a sign of weakness, and that you are weak. So we banded together on the streets and hanging out with each other, of wanting to see what that power was about. And the only way that we could test that power was on other people who we perceived as being weak, and victimize them.
Was becoming a gang member something that completely took over your life? Did you drop out of school right away, or did that happen later?
It happened almost towards the end of my senior year, but I spent most of my senior year in custody, incarcerated in the youth camp.
And what kind of stuff did you do while you were in the gang? What were the activities of the gang members?
I was basically moved towards the front of the gangs as they were starting. Most of the guys came together as a sense of identity. We fashioned our gangs back then. I grew up in a predominantly white area. It was actually at the time in the late 60s, which was a restricted area, means it was very segregated. Black people were not allowed to live or rent homes in that area. So it was a very racist area. And the racism came out basically in hate of anything, not just skin color, but people who were different. And using that element of hate, as I call it, or say it is hate, that the gang was an opportunity for me to vent, to really take it out on other people, to spread the hurt, the hate, the anger, the pain that I had in myself. So like I said, a lot of the guys came together for an identity thing. We fashioned ourselves after like a motorcycle gang. We had a jacket, and everybody had what they called a patch, and it said our name on it. It said Satan's Sons, which was basically kind of a street gang for Hell's Angels, who still exist this day. And so when there was 30 to 40 of us walking down the street, all with wearing the same uniform in a sense, it was very intimidating to people. And we got a sense of that intimidation as power. And I got a little carried away with it, and that I was initiating fights against other neighborhoods who were wearing their jackets. And by the time I was age 16, I already had committed a couple of attempted murders and stabbing people and beating people, and was committing home burglaries and robberies for weapons and this sort of thing. And I just kind of really got out there and just kind of went wild with it.
Tell us about how one of those took place, one of those beatings took place that you participated in, what brought it about, what happened?
There was one incident, and again, I don't glamorize or glorify these things, and that there were some kids in another neighborhood just basically said our neighborhood we were just a bunch of Rudy Poos,
Rudy Poos?
Yeah, which is nothing, But the word in itself, I took it as a direct threat to the core of our existence, and loaded up with 2 carloads and went to their neighborhood and initiated a fight with them. And we chased a fight broke out, and I was chasing one person down and took out a knife when he stopped and stabbed him. And unfortunately, I hurt him. I meant to kill him. The knife went through his arm, basically pinned his arm into his stomach, and people were screaming and yelling all around him. And I have to be honest with you, this is the scary part of this mindset, is that I felt nothing. I mean, at that moment, it was no different than if I had stuck it into an inanimate object, meaning I had objectified this individual.
Now, that's interesting. I mean, looking back at it from today, you could see where this was a horrifying thing to do, but even at the time, you didn't feel anything. You didn't feel a sense of power, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of exerting your power over someone else.
That I did feel, but on the things that I should have felt, meaning with my conscience, the remorse or the regret, or even the voice, my conscience of coming in and saying, hey, Jim, this is wrong. This is not what you do to another human being, didn't enter the picture. Instead it was, if I do this to another human being, in the validation and my earning my stripes, as you call it, of my reputation, quickly came in, and people, my own friends, were at awe with what I had just done. And I think they stood in awe with it because, as Joseph Campbell has put it before, there's a lot of people who have the courage of the knife, and they do not have the courage of the blood, though. And a lot of my friends didn't have the courage of the blood, thank God, but those who do usually can move up the ladder or the hierarchy a lot faster.
Your brother died in your arms, and that partly came about because of your activities in gangs?
Yeah, it came about by meeting up with other people who also had the courage of the blood. And then it was a life or death situation. And this one incident, it was actually my 20th birthday in 1973, August 26th. I had initiated a fight with 4 rival gang members, or people from another neighborhood who had come into our party while I was gone. My brother wasn't living this lifestyle, meaning that he had not adopted his way of life of being mean, rude, and cruel. His was rather being nice, kind, and polite. There was a 2-year difference in us. We went to different schools.
He was younger?
Yes, he was 2 years younger than I was, and he was brought up in Catholic school, where I was brought up in public school. And it was us in the public school who were really, like I said, getting carried away with it. And in this particular party, when the fight broke out, this person that we were fighting, one of them cut me in the stomach. He ran in there to help me, and not knowing what I mean, not having that element of being mean and unkind and cruel to really be in the moment. He ran in, and this person buried a knife in his throat. He died 30 seconds away from an emergency room on my lap in a car, and it was a horrifying experience.
Well, you mentioned when you had stabbed someone, you felt nothing. What about when that violence occurred to your brother? What did you feel then?
Rage, anger, that it was hard for me to own and be responsible for what I had caused, the cause and effect. And it was easy to scapegoat again and to point the finger and the blame of somebody who was the murderer, and then vowed to get revenge, vowed to retaliate.
Did you?
The plan was, what ended up happening was, somehow in court, within the system, it was ruled self-defense. That because after he had stabbed my brother in the neck, cut me, stabbed my brother in the neck, when other people jumped in, including one of my other brothers who was stabbed in the leg also, the person was released. And then we had a meeting. We actually had a meeting. We called a meeting and issued a death warrant on him, and my brothers and my friends. And the agreement was that because he originally tried to take my life, but took my brother's, that I was the one to take him out, and no one else could do that. If anything, the plan was, and again, I'm not proud of these things, but this is that mindset. The plan was that we would abduct the individual, and that I would, while everybody held him down, that I would slowly cut his head off with a razor blade and take my time about it and keep him alive as long as I possibly could so he could suffer before he was completely decapitated. We tried many times to abduct him or go down there and get him, and it was not to our advantage at that time, which I'm glad. Make a long story short, 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago, I called this individual up because I always kept tabs of where he was. And also figured if I gave it some time, that even if I killed him 20 years later, no one would ever suspect anything. But instead of that, 15 years later, what I did was I called him up and I forgave him. And it wasn't easy to do.
You were 20 when your brother died,
Yes.
but it was another 10 years before you got away from gangs. Why was it 10 more years?
One of the reasons, there's several reasons, but one of the main reasons as I look back on it was that I come from a family of addiction, whether that's drugs and whether that's alcohol. Those were never my choice of drugs. Unfortunately, the choice of drug that I chose was violence, the adrenaline rush of it. And so it took a good while to get off that drug. And it finally took 10 years of battling with it and seeing how it almost destroyed my life and other people's lives in many cases, that in the spring of 1983 is when I finally gave it all up. And it was over an incident where I had shot someone, and the person, I had left him for dead and figured he was dead, and turned out he lived. And I was looking at 6 years in prison. And my life was just coming together in other areas where I was just getting remarried. My second wife was 8 months pregnant. I just got in custody of my two kids from my other marriage, and things were going really well. And I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And that was the main motivating factor, was that what I had put together I was going to lose. But later on, what I found on a deeper level was that there was a big part of myself that really just didn't want to do this anymore.
It doesn't sound like there was a before and after. Your life had begun to change before the moment when you decided you would leave the gang. And was leaving the gang very difficult? Was that a big part of your identity, having been in it for 13 years?
It was a big part of my identity, but also after 13 years, those people that I were running with didn't have the stamina, I would say. They were war weary, and didn't use much common sense anymore because of their alcohol use or their drug use. So I was basically starting to become the leader of an outfit of misfits, the people who just couldn't function in that life anymore. And then to bring up a whole new generation of kids, the younger ones, then I'd have to be active in managing them, in training them, and it's just a lot of work. And it was actually easier to leave a gang then than it is now, meaning that the myths that gangs live by, for example, that if you get into a gang you will either be shot and killed or you have to move away to get out, is a myth. In some areas that myth isn't as strong, in other areas it is very strong, that it does happen. But the myth wasn't alive, and I could easily walk away. And it was easy to walk away also because I had a status, I was a powerful status that I can make any decision I wanted, whether I wanted it or not.
Because you'd been in the gang so long, you had that status. What was it like trying to put your life together, organized around something else aside from the gang afterwards? What did you choose to try to do when you left the gang?
Well, one thing I did have going for myself, Ross, was that I lived this very paradoxical life. And even though I was very successful as a gang member, I was also very successful as a commercial printer. And when I had come out of the California Youth Authority at age 19 I was sentenced for 2 years from another incident. And when I came out of the California Youth Authority, I had a very good parole officer who found me a job in a commercial print plant, and I moved myself all the way up in the print plant to doing all the graphic work, to running printing presses. So by day I was working this journeyman union job in San Francisco, and then by the evenings and weeknights I was out gangbanging. So I had earned a really good income that allowed me to afford a very good criminal attorney. I had a house with nice things in it that wasn't from drug sales, so the police weren't ever going to rush in and take them from me. So I had the best, basically, of both worlds.
That seems like such a hard dual life to be living, to be working a straight job in the daytime and being a gang member at night. Wasn't there a lot of tension between those two sides of your life at that time?
No, and you know why? As I look back on it, sometimes I even think, God bless his soul, what was my employer thinking? In that, because I was very valuable to him in the trade, in the shop. I mean, I'm not kidding. There was several times, for instance, when I shot this individual, and I called him up and I said, Mitch, by the way, I won't be in on Monday or Tuesday. I shot someone over the weekend. I need to go take care of this. I'm putting in for a couple of vacation days. And he was like, okay, I'll see you on Thursday.
Well, on the other hand, what about the gang members? When you said, well, I got to go to work tomorrow at the print plant, I mean, was that weird on that side too?
Basically, by this time in our late 30s, most of us had our own homes. We had our own families. We had our own children. So there was more that we hung out in the homes, less than on the streets. Though we all had our lowrider cars, and we'd go out in the evenings and on the weekends and party or go somewhere into Richmond or so and hang out that way. We weren't really a street gang anymore where we were roaming the streets. We had our own homes. Like I said, we'd party and we did drugs and we did alcohol and did whatever. And sadly to say, we did this in the presence of our children. And our children were learning this. I have pictures of my son, and I'm proud of this, when he was 4 years old with a headband on his head with a loaded .38 in one hand and my rifle in the other hand, and I'm teaching him to be aggressive. I'm demanding that he be mean in these pictures, and that was his upbringing. And
as you have undone your life and reformed your life, have you been able to undo that training that you gave him before you changed your life around?
Unfortunately, he passed away 10 years ago when he was 11. And that is another thing that opened my eyes, when I had gotten out, that when I held him in my arms when he died, he had fallen at school and I wasn't aware of it, and the next day he had hemorrhaged and was in a coma for a week. At the end of a week, I took him off the life support system and held him while he died, and actually even had my head on his chest when I heard the last heartbeat in his chest. And when you see someone die, you have an opportunity, if you can really stay there with it, to see how precious, how fragile sacred life is. When you watch someone get murdered and they die because of it, you don't see the dying part, and you don't realize that it's precious and it's fragile, and you want to go out and do that to someone else is the first thing on your mind. But once you see, and know, I should say, how precious life is, you don't want to go out and do that to anyone else. Now, the training that he was, I don't know how he may have turned out, but I can tell you how my two nephews turned out who had the same training. 6.5 years ago, because of how we encouraged them, not encouraged them, but put it almost as they were indoctrinated, and it was a dogma, it was whatever that we believed in, that they'd be violent. And my nephews, who were 20 and 16, almost 16 at the time, engaged in a 4-hour shootout with the sheriff's department. What ended the shootout was my 20-year-old nephew looked out the window to see what was going on with the police after they had fired hundreds of rounds at each other. And a sniper was waiting for his opportunity and shot and killed my nephew right through here, through the chin, and killed him instantly. My other nephew was sentenced to 39 years in the youth authority. He's been locked up for 6.5 years, has about 2.5 to go. When he gets out, he'll be locked up almost 10 years, and he's gangbanging really hard in the youth authority as survival. And so I have an idea that had I continued to raise him that way, he would have turned out that way as well.
Your life is not one that one would expect to have turned to philosophy in your 30s, but indeed that is what happened. How did you get involved in philosophy? How did you get interested in it? I'm
a very intelligent person, in that's what kind of drove me through a lot of this. I use my intelligence, which my mom could comment to this day, that's what scared her the most, that if he gets into this thing with the mind that he has, we're all in trouble, But that has changed, and now I use my mind for a more positive thing. And philosophy is something that rings true to me, in that the whole time that I was involved in this negative lifestyle, this lifestyle of violence, I can consciously remember also a voice in my head, or this undercurrent of a train of thought that says that there's a reason behind this. There's something about this that makes some sort of sense of this nonsensical stuff. And learned, again through reading and seeing philosophy in other people's lives. Philosophy, not just a cliches or words or phrases of certain people, but it's how you live your life, and how you live your life is what gives it meaning. And I knew that I was crying out for some sort of meaning in my life, meaning that I felt comfortable with living my life in a positive way.
Among the philosophers who you studied were Kierkegaard, the Danish existentialist. Could you talk a little bit about something specific in Kierkegaard's philosophy that you could relate to your life as a former gang member?
Yes. In one of his books entitled The Present Age, Kierkegaard speaks a lot to dialectics, complementary opposites. In that a complementary opposite is, to myself as I've lived it, is something that doesn't stand opposed or diametrically opposite, like yourself and myself. I'll give you an example. That diametrically we are situated across from this table, but dialectically there are things that we have in common that maybe we've just met recently, just now, myself just coming here to Seattle, that in given time we would see how we could complement one another. What it is that you have to put on the table, what it is that I have to put on the table, that we could equally share, what we can share with one another. And so his work of dialectics is something that I really hold true to. When I came into this work, especially working with gang members, that I would be seen as a rival, because some of my nieces and nephews were claiming gangs that were their rivals. I knew that the one thing that was going to keep me alive was the dialectics. That so long as I was a complementary opposite to them, I would never be a threat. And the moment that I became or was seen diametrically opposed to them, I would probably lose my life. So his works, especially around dialectics, and again him speaking of that complementary opposite that is so hard for people to do because it's a giving. It's intimacy. It's being involved with that person. It's easy for myself to be diametrically situated from yourself, because then I can just put things out and walk away and say, I did something.
You not only left the gang, but you also got involved in violence prevention, and then you went to work for the Concord, California Police Department in preventing violence among youth gangs, and you asked permission of the gang members to work with the police department. Could you describe that?
Yes, asked, again, permission in the sense that I had built a very close relationship with them, built on trust, and we were friends. The way I get involved with kids, and it's very hard, the work I do, it's very overwhelming, is that I become their friend. I kind of break the one rule that most professionals follow, which is I understand that you do not become emotionally involved, whether you're a doctor or teacher or whatever, because it's too much to carry with you. Well, I become emotionally involved with them and become their friends, because then I can influence them like a friend. And all of us have really close friends that we really listen to and take things to heart and from heart, and we'll act on that more than we will sometimes even our own family relatives. And having become friends with them and building that trust, they do not trust the system. They do not trust the bureaucracy. They do not trust the criminal justice system. And now seeing myself becoming involved in that, I thought they weren't going to trust me. When I explained to them what it is and the vantage point that I would be in to help them even further, meaning that we had a teen center, we had resources from the city to go on our field trips that we want to do and this sort of thing, they saw the benefit. They saw how it would complement them and not be, and not take away from what we were doing. And basically, with their blessing, said, yeah, go for it. And that helped us to keep our friendship.
You mentioned that there was a philosophy of a gang. And as you learned philosophy, you learned other sorts of philosophies. Were you able to bring that broader perspective to your work with the gang members to say that this isn't the only philosophy you can live by?
Yes, directly and indirectly. Directly is that I can sit down and point out, they'll see me reading things sometimes, and like, what are you reading, Jim? Well, that's pretty deep. And whether it's Buddhist philosophy or existential philosophy or philosophy of the Stoics or whoever, I share that with them also indirectly through speaking parabolically, through parables. And I will give them stories.
Could you give an example of that?
Okay. I call this one girl I've been working up with on the phone, and I just drop it. I just drop it on her on the phone. I said, Shelley, pay attention for a minute. She goes, I said, I only have a few minutes and I got to go. She goes, well, what's going on, Jim? I said, okay, there's 5 guys who get in a boat and they row out into sea 50 miles. The sea is very calm. One of the men in the boat decides to jump out and go for a swim. It just looks so nice. Well, as soon as he's done having his fun, he turns and he swims back to the boat. Well, he doesn't know he's angered the other 4 men, because when he jumped out, he almost tipped the boat over. Now they position themselves all around the boat in 360 degrees with their oars, so he can't get in. If he tries to, they're going to bash him in the head. How does he get back in the boat? I'll talk to you tomorrow at school. Goodbye. And I hang up. So I know she's contemplating this all night,
For sure. She's not just going, oh, Jim, he's nuts. That engages her.
Yeah. And the next morning she shows up with 2 other friends, and I guess she had pulled them into it. And she says, he swims underneath and tips the boat over. I said, no, he's got to get in the boat. And they all got to get back to the shore. And remember, they're 50 miles out at sea. I'll see you in 2 periods. Well, I stole the 50 mile because they start using it's a chance for her to, briefly what happens is, there's 6 senses. I've read a book called The Question of Values. And this author breaks down in 6 categories of values that we pick from. The 5 senses: logic, intuition, emotions, science, and authority. Young people are, especially in a gang lifestyle, are so in tune with the 5 senses. If I can touch it, breathe it, whatever, I believe in it. So I threw in a little into this equation some logical stuff that she's going to try to calculate out. Well, later on when she comes up to me, I say, well, here's the answer. Are you ready? She says, yeah. I said, the 4 guys in the boat have to be nice to him. They have to forgive him. And she's like, what is all this about? And then she got it. I saw her face drop, and she's like, I said, I see you get it. She goes, yeah. I said, do you recognize that you are sometimes the people in the boat, that when people cross you, there is no forgiving? And you also recognize that at times you're the person in the ocean. Things just look so good and spontaneous, compulsively you jump into things. And she saw that, and she was like, wow, I am both. And so indirectly she was able to own her issue that she struggles with of forgiving and not forgiving, and that paradox that lies deep within it.
That's a great story.
Thank you.
Could you give like another example of a parable like that, or another story from philosophy that you've been able to use?
I also do a lot of gang awareness, and I do a lot of training to, whether it's police officers, to mental health people, to medical facilities, and so on. And there are a lot of people, and here's the way I use it in my work, that want to go out and make a difference. They want to make an impact. And speaking of dialectics, it fits right in there. It's there's a book out called The Parables of Kierkegaard. And the first page that you open up to, it's on conflagration. And in this parable, what happens is he says it happens at one time in a theater that a fire broke out backstage. And all the people were waiting for the theater to start. And as the fire broke out and was going to rapidly spread through the theater, the manager sent out the clown to warn everybody and tell them to leave, flee, the building's on fire. Well, when the clown came out and was saying, run, flee, the building's on fire, they all laughed. They thought it was a joke. And so the more he tried, the more the crowd laughed. And Kierkegaard his understanding was it left him with a feeling that when man does go out, if humanity does not make it, that we would basically go out that way, that we just didn't get the warning signs. So I use that parable a lot in that if a lot of people want to come out, do not send the clown out to talk to these kids. You need to find that complementary opposite. The clown has its place. Or meaning, do not send the authoritarian out. See who it is that you're engaging, who that part of yourself is going to engage with whatever group it is. And I've learned that even working with law enforcement, or I work with the John Muir Medical Center, where there's a program we have where I go in and do critical incident stress debriefing to people who are shot up. And each group has its own different symbols, I would say, that they respond to. And that's what we need to do to be effective.
Are the gangs that you work with today in Concord, California, quite a bit different from the gangs that you were involved with?
The gangs actually in Concord, California, here's what's nice, is that in that area there's a lot of what they call wannabes. They really don't have a lot of direct knowledge or information compared to West Contra Costa County, where it's thriving. It's been there a long time. So one of the things I've been instrumental in helping in Central Contra Costa County with is to help these kids redirect their energies, redirect their own philosophy, in a sense, of not getting involved in it, by explaining to them, in a sense, that they already are showing them that they have the world already, basically, if they want it. But that lies in their social conduct, in the conduct of either being nice and kind and polite, or mean, rude, and cruel, that you're going to get a lot further in life if you're nice and kind and polite. It doesn't guarantee that people aren't going to treat you nice. But in order to maintain that and sustain it, it needs to be practiced, just like if you're practicing sports or musical instruments, you need to practice that. So
we've just got a moment left. You've lived the gang life. You've worked for quite a while trying to get kids out of gangs. Do you see some point in your life where you just won't want to be involved in it?
No, this is my life's work. This is really my life's work, and to be a symbol for people that not only can we overcome it, but we can live a balanced life.
Jim Hernandez from Concord, California, violence prevention specialist. Thanks very much for being on Upon Reflection.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
To see more UWTV classics, visit uwtv.org/classics.